Hi, everybody. I'm Judy, the YouTube lawyer. Today, we have some special guests here. We have Susan from True Lifestyles and Joel Waltman from Surviving the Survivor. And we are all going to be reading together the deposition of Wendi Adelson. This was part of the criminal case back in July, I think, of 2019. So let's welcome our special guest to the stream. Hi, Susan.
Hi, everybody.
Hi. And hello, Joel.
How are you, Judy? How are you guys? Great to be here.
Thank you, guys. Thank you for being here. So let's get started because it is a pretty long deposition. Okay, so State of Florida versus Sigfredo Garcia and Catherine Magbanua, deposition of Wendi Adelson, July 2nd, 2019. It was held at the Public Defender's Office in Miami. Okay, so on behalf of the plaintiff was Georgia Kappelman. On behalf of the defendant were Christopher DeCoste and Tara Kawas. And on behalf of the witness, Wendi Adelson, was John Lauro, Esquire. Okay, so Wendi Adelson is first duly sworn and testifies as follows. Okay, Ms. Kawas.
Okay, and I am Tara Kawas. You guys, please excuse any bad Jamaican accent. All right, so can you spell your name for the record, please?
Wendi Adelson, Wendiadelson.
Your date of birth?
Redacted. Before
we went on the record, we just discussed some of the parameters of the deposition. Is there anything you are confused about before we proceed? I just want to make sure that everybody is on the same page before we go forward.
I'm not confused.
Do you understand why we are here today?
I understand why I'm here today.
Do you know someone by the name of Catherine Magbanua?
Hold on. Please assert.
On the advice of my counsel, I assert my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution and under the Florida Constitution.
Off the record.
All right.
It might be easier if she can say I assert as opposed to the longer version, if that is okay. I agree.
I agree. We will make that clear for the record that any time Mrs. Adelson says, I assert, the statement that she previously answered to the previous question is her assertion to the Fifth Amendment privilege not to answer the question. Mrs. Adelson, do you know someone by the name of Sigfredo Garcia?
I assert.
I assert.
Okay, we are here today at the Miami-Dade Public Defender's Office. My name is Tara Kawas and Christopher DeCoste. We represent Catherine Magbanua. Also in the room, I would have all other parties announce their presence. Georgia Kappelman of the state of Florida.
John Lauro for the witness.
Wendi Adelson, the witness.
We are here. I'm going to pull up the case number, Leon County case number 16CF3036.
18CF498. I don't know if it's from Sigfredo's case, but I can pull it.
We are here because you have been listed as by the state of Florida as a witness concerning the homicide of your ex-husband, Dan Markel.
You don't have to respond. These are just questions, preface to her questions.
I'm going to go back in time. I'm not going to go into too much detail concerning your, how you met Dan and that other stuff. But where did you meet Dan Markel?
You can answer.
Washington, D.C.
Were you in law school at that time?
You can answer.
Yes.
And was he in law school at that time, or was he already graduated from law school?
You can answer.
He was already graduated from law school.
Okay. All right. Sorry, I got a little bit lost. Okay. Sorry. Okay, how did you guys meet? Okay, we met through, sorry, I'm
Line
reloading.
17.
Sorry, it's page 17, sorry. My apologies. All right.
Do you have it?
What page are we on, you guys?
We're on page 7, line 17.
Okay, I'm sorry, my iPad just closed up. I'm so sorry. Okay. How long did, okay.
Do you want me to read it?
What was the last line?
Okay. So, sorry.
Sorry.
First line is, get it together, counselor. How did you guys meet?
Okay.
You don't have.
How did you guys meet? You don't have to be too specific. Just give a vague description of how it is you two met.
You can answer.
Okay. So we met through the dating website. Okay.
We met through a dating website.
Okay. So were you living in Washington, D.C. at the time?
You can answer.
I was not.
Where were you living? Or no, sorry, were you visiting?
You can answer.
I was there for a job interview.
How long would you say you were dating Dan before it became more serious?
You can answer.
Maybe 6 months.
We will put approximately for the record. Now, you met him in Washington, D.C., but where were you living at the time?
You can answer.
Miami.
You continued dating him when you came back to Miami?
You can answer.
Yes.
Where was Dan living at the time?
You can answer.
Washington, D.C.
Okay, so at that point, you guys were maintaining a long distance relationship?
You can answer.
Yes.
What year was this?
2004.
Then when was it that you guys got married?
2006.
The wedding was here in South Florida, correct?
Correct.
And describe for me, if you can, how was the first meeting between your parents and Dan Markel when you first introduced him to your parents?
You can answer.
Nice.
Did your parents like him?
Yes.
When did you first introduce your brother, Charlie, to Dan?
You can answer.
I don't remember.
Would that have been, do you remember if their first meeting may have been in Miami?
You can answer.
Maybe.
So just to be clear, you don't remember the specific interactions where they first met?
I don't.
Do you remember if after meeting him, what Charlie's opinion of Dan was when he first met him?
You can answer.
I don't.
You don't remember what his opinion was?
I don't remember.
Do you remember at the very beginning, Charlie ever stating to you that he did not like Dan when you were first dating?
You can answer.
I don't remember.
But your parents, they were okay with you dating him?
Yes.
Okay, any issues at all before you guys got married in terms of not between you and Dan, any disruption between Dan and your family?
Not that I remember.
Were there any issues in regards to the wedding?
You can answer.
Can you be more specific?
Have you listened to the podcast that is in relation to this case?
No. I want you to assert your right.
I assert.
There was information that there was an incident at your wedding regarding kosher meals.
As to that question, I want you to assert relating to the podcast. If you want to ask a question separate from the podcast, I have no objection.
I won't frame it in terms of the podcast. I will just ask you specifically about the issue of the food at your wedding. Do you remember there being an issue with the food at your wedding?
Yes.
What was the issue with the food at your wedding?
The wedding was supposed to be kosher style.
And
There was some confusion about whether that was followed.
okay, did you believe that this was the fault of whoever the caterer was?
Yes.
Was there any indication that anyone in your family had purposefully made the food not kosher?
No.
When you found out at the wedding that the food wasn't kosher, did you take any action at that time?
No.
This is because it was your wedding day?
This is because I didn't know what I would do. I was focused on other things.
Did Dan take much issue with the fact that that had happened at the wedding?
He was upset.
How would you describe, was he upset with you or was he upset with the people who prepared the food?
You can answer.
I don't know who he was upset with.
Did he ever make an accusation to you that he believed that your family had something to do with the food not being kosher?
Yes.
He thought that?
Uh-huh.
At the time of your wedding, did Dan ever express to you why he thought your parents would have done that?
You can answer.
No.
Are you Jewish?
I don't know how that is appropriate, but you can answer.
Yes.
The reason I'm asking in terms of how strict your religion, do you and your family follow kosher diet in regards to your religion?
I don't follow a kosher diet.
Did you talk to your parents about this incident at the wedding, or did you just let it go?
No.
You just let it go. Okay.
The court reporter. I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. No, I didn't talk to them about it.
Yes, you let it go.
Yes, I let it go.
My fault. I moved too fast. Then, apart from that time, did your parents ever voice to you, because this was your wedding, any objections or reservations about your marrying Dan?
You can answer.
No.
Okay. Had they voiced any objection, was the relationship such with your parents that you would have disregarded their suggestion not to marry him?
You can answer, but I have no idea how that can be relevant to this case, but you can answer it.
Can you repeat the question?
I almost lost my train of thought with the question. Had your parents at that time, so you are about to get married, if your parents had said to you, we don't want you to marry Dan, we don't like him, how much impact would that have had on your decision to continue the wedding?
You can answer.
I have no idea.
Okay, is it fair to say you are a different person now than you were in 2006?
It's been a long time.
How old were you in 2006?
I am redacted now.
Okay, so we'll do the calculation. When did you have your first child?
You can answer.
Redacted.
I'm going to ask the name of your child, but for the record, if you can just put initials. Which one is your first child?
B.
All right, at this point in your marriage, how is everything with Dan when you have your first son?
You can answer.
I don't remember.
Do you remember if things were contingent at that point, or were they generally, you were in a good place? Would you describe your relationship being in a good place?
You can answer.
Yes.
How close are you with your mom?
Are you talking about back then or now?
We can start back then. Back then, how close were you with your mother?
You can answer.
I don't know how to answer that question. How do you, on a scale from 1 to 10?
I can let you know. I speak to my mother every single day. Do you talk to your mom every day?
Back then.
Okay, 2004 to
No,
2000.
was back then.
Oh, sorry, back then. Sorry, guys.
2004, 2005, 2006.
We're talking about 2004 or 2009.
Let's go around blank. On the birth of B.
I would say we were close.
Okay, did you talk more with your mom? Were you closer with your mom or with your dad?
At that time, you can answer.
I'm close with both of my parents, but since my dad has hearing trouble, it's hard for him to listen on the phone. The question of who I talk to more on the phone has more to do with his trouble. He had a brain tumor and lost hearing, so that has more to do with his hearing and less to do with the closeness. It's not a good metric for evaluating the closeness of our relationship.
Okay, I understand. Understood. Going back around 2009, I want to talk about your decision to move to Tallahassee. Okay, you were what law school did you graduate from?
You can answer.
I graduated from the University of Miami Law School.
And when did you move to Tallahassee?
You can answer.
So I moved to Tallahassee for my last year of law school, 2005.
Did you transfer? Did you complete your last year of law school up in Tallahassee?
You can answer.
I did.
How did you like Tallahassee?
You can answer.
I don't remember at the time.
Were you upset that you had to move to Tallahassee?
You can answer.
No.
And so you had B when you were living in Tallahassee.
I did.
How long in total did you live in Tallahassee?
I lived there 2005 to 2006. We came back to Miami for the academic year of 2006 to 2007 and moved back to Tallahassee at some point in 2007, 2008, 2009, 2010, 2011, 2012. I guess I was there 9 years total. That doesn't sound right. It was more like 8 years.
Would it be fair to say around 2014 is when you left Tallahassee permanently and moved to Miami?
You can answer.
Yes.
Understanding that we are talking about something that happened a long time ago, we do understand that for the record, that these are just approximations. If you are off by a little time, it's fine.
Okay.
When you lived back in Miami from 2006 to 2007, was Dan living there with you too?
You can answer.
So he came for half the year. He came to be a visiting professor at the University of Miami. They told him that he can come back for the fall semester, but he had to go back to Tallahassee the spring semester. So in the spring semester, we commuted to see each other.
While you remained in Miami, he was in Tallahassee.
I had a full-year job in Miami. He started teaching back at FSU in the spring semester. So I don't remember who was traveling more often, but we went back and forth.
Was there any attempt to try to secure a job for him there in Miami?
That is why he came to teach.
That just fell through?
You can answer.
They voted on him, and they voted no.
So he got the job up at FSU and moved to Tallahassee.
You can answer.
He already had the job at FSU.
As
DeCoste.
Mr. DeCoste. If I can jump in with a question.
Uh-huh.
Do you know the reason why he was not extended an offer by the University of Miami Law School? You can answer.
No.
Was there an indication that it was because of a personal dispute that he had with others within the school, if you know? You can answer.
I don't know.
Okay.
So how often around blank? Because this is when B is born. How often would your parents come up to visit you?
You can answer.
My mom and dad came for the birth, and then my mom stayed for a few weeks to help us. And then after that, I really don't remember.
Okay.
I guess maybe like once a month.
Would they just drive up from South Florida every time they came to see you?
You can answer.
Yes. I mean, there may have been times they flew, but probably drove most of the time.
For the most part, they would drive.
Uh-huh.
Answer yes rather than uh-huh.
Okay.
Did Charlie ever visit you in Tallahassee?
Yes.
Do you remember how many times he had been there?
You can answer.
Probably a couple of times before we got married. So maybe between 1 and 3 before we got married. And then he came for each of the births. And I remember him coming for my 30th birthday party when I was pregnant with B. So that would have been 2009. That is probably it.
Okay. When he would come to Tallahassee, would he stay there with you and Dan?
You can answer.
Yes.
On those occasions, do you remember ever there being any contention between Charlie and Dan while they were staying at your house?
You can answer.
Never.
Okay, how would you describe from your observation of their relationship?
You can answer.
Fine.
If Charlie didn't like Dan, would he have voiced that opinion to you?
I don't know if she can answer you that, but you can.
I don't know.
Are you close with your brother Charlie?
Hold on. The extent to which you are asking her at that time is fine.
At that time.
The cost.
The cost. Is there an objection to it? Because, I mean, if you want to object for the record, that's fine. Otherwise, I would ask that you would just object. Tara asked the question. If she understands it, she can answer, as Mr. Laurel. If the question encompasses, are you close to Charlie now, then I will instruct her to assert. If the question is, were you close to your brother back in 2009, then she's free to answer.
I will make sure to keep the time frame, clear for the record. So I think the question was, I can't recall what your answer was back then. Do you remember if you were really close to your brother Charlie?
When is back then?
When the birth of your son B.
Yes.
Okay, but you can't ever recall Dan and Charlie getting into an argument in your presence?
Back in 2000.
Back in 2009.
No.
Back in 2009, did Dan ever express to you, he didn't like Charlie in any way?
You can answer.
I don't remember him ever saying that.
Okay, how about your brother Robert? Back in 2009, had he met Dan Markel?
You can answer.
Yes.
Had he come to visit you guys in Tallahassee as well, too?
You can answer.
I'm trying to remember. So Rob and Haritha came to visit.
As the cost. Is that Campbell?
No.
Maiden name Campbell?
No.
You know her maiden name.
It's the same name that she has now, Chalapali.
Do you know the spelling for the reporter?
Sure. Haritha is Haritha, and Chalapali is Challapalli. It's possible that it's CHALLI instead of CHALLA, but that's close enough.
I think we were talking about if Rob ever met Dan before.
You can answer.
Yes, he met him.
Did Rob ever express to you how he felt about Dan? If he liked him, if he felt he was a good guy for you?
You can answer.
I don't remember there being a problem. I don't remember him saying anything negative.
When is it that things started to break down in your marriage?
You can answer if you understand the question.
It's been a lot of years.
I know. When I say things are like, I don't remember, I'm not trying to trick you in any way. If that is the answer, that is the answer.
I don't remember.
Do you recall if it was one specific thing that happened? And by that, I mean, in certain relationships, you say, oh, he cheated on me. So that was what caused us to start to fight and those kinds of things. In your relationship with Dan, was there one specific event, a fight or anything like that? Do you know, would you say, was there a point where things were starting to fall apart in your marriage?
You can answer.
No.
How would you describe? Would you just say you guys were just growing apart? Or how did you know that the marriage was not working out?
You can answer that.
I think saying we were growing apart is the fair description.
Is a fair description okay? How would you describe Dan at this point in your marriage, personality-wise?
In what point? 2009?
2009. And the reason I am asking is there have been, and you don't have to answer any of these assertions I'm about to make, but there have been several media reports and news shows about this case. They make portrayals about Dan, about who Dan was. But I am asking you, since you knew him, you were married to him, the type of, how would you describe him and the words would you use to describe his personality in 2009?
You can answer.
I think his personality was consistent from the time we met throughout 2009 or any other time. I mean, he was smart. He was hardworking. He was interested in his career.
Did he ever express to you how he felt about your career?
You can answer that.
Yes.
What was that opinion?
You can answer that.
I know he wanted me to work. I thought about maybe taking a break after I had B in redacted. He thought it was important that I continue working.
Okay.
I remember that.
Do you remember if that was because of a financial need, or he just felt a different opinion, that he just thought it would be a good idea, that it would be good that you would be working?
You can answer.
It wasn't for financial reasons.
Then when you had your second son, did that position of his change at all?
You can answer.
No.
So he always supported you having a job.
Yes.
When is it you served him with your divorce papers?
Assert.
I assert.
Okay, when I go into an area, you're going to assert. I will continue just asking question, just so it's clear for the record, okay? So I have that divorce. I just want to make sure and give a time frame if it is necessary, okay? Around 2012, were you still living with Dan?
You can answer that question.
I'm trying to remember. We lived together for most of 2012.
For most of 2012. Okay, then did you move out of the house?
You can answer that question.
Yes.
Okay, in 2012, what address were you both living at?
You can answer that.
2116 Trescott Drive.
When you moved out, did the boys move out with you?
You can understand that?
Yes.
When you first moved out in 2012, did you move to another location in Tallahassee, or did you come down to South Florida?
You can answer that.
I moved to another location in Tallahassee.
Okay, was this a temporary location? Was your intention eventually to move down to South Florida?
You can answer that question.
No.
How long were you living in this area, in this other address that you moved to?
You can answer that question.
I moved in 2012. I lived there until after Danny's memorial service.
It would be from 2012 until you left Tallahassee. It was the same address?
You can answer that.
What
Yes.
was that address?
You can answer that.
3303 Aqua Ridge Way, I think.
I can rely on any of the reports where the officers initially spoke to you and they put your address at that time?
Assert.
I assert.
How far away was that address from Trescott?
You can answer that.
I don't remember, but I'm sure we can use Google and see how many miles apart it was.
Okay, but they weren't you weren't living on the same street. It wasn't close.
You can answer.
It wasn't the same street.
Would you say it would take a 10-minute drive from his house to your house?
You can answer.
That's about what I remember, depending on traffic, maybe 10, 15 minutes.
So you first moved into that address, and this time when you are living at that address, when is it that you filed the paperwork for the divorce?
Assert.
I assert.
Do you know how Dan found out about that? He was being served with divorce papers.
Assert.
I assert.
Did you speak with Dan Markel after he was being served with the divorce papers?
Assert.
I assert.
Do you remember the conversations that you had with Dan about that?
Assert.
I assert.
Do you remember the nature of the conversations? Was Dan upset when he was speaking with you?
Assert.
I assert.
At this time, how involved were your parents in the decision to file for divorce?
Assert.
I assert.
Who are your lawyers at the time of your divorce?
You can answer that.
Different lawyers at different times. My best recollection is that Shannon Novi was my first lawyer,
Was your first lawyer? Okay.
I think.
She was a practicing attorney in Tallahassee?
You can answer that.
Yes.
How did you find her? Did you find her on your own, or did your parents recommend her?
Assert.
I assert.
Is there any particular incident that was the culminating factor that caused you to file for divorce, or was this a combination of many things?
You can answer.
It was a combination of many things.
Okay, would it be fair to say Dan had any indication, to your knowledge, that the divorce was coming?
You can answer that.
Yes.
Had it previously at least discussed with the two of you before the divorce was actually filed?
You can answer.
Yes.
So it's fair to say this wasn't a 100% out of the blue shock that you filed for divorce?
You can answer.
Yes.
Now, after the paperwork is filed, is that the same day you move into a different location?
On that, I want you to assert.
I assert.
Okay, how many times? When is the first time you saw Dan after the divorce paperwork is filed?
You can answer.
He was out of town when I filed, and so as soon as he came back, Danny and I got together with the boys and had ice cream.
Was this an attempt to explain to the boys that you were both going to separate?
You can answer that.
No.
What was you were just meeting with the boys together to have ice cream?
You can answer that.
I wanted him to see the kids and to talk.
How was that conversation with him?
You can answer that.
I don't really remember.
In other words, it didn't get aggressive in any way, or did it remain calm and it was a good conversation?
You can answer that.
It was calm.
Okay.
We had friends with us too. So there was another couple there with us and the kids. That is what I remember.
Did you ever at this time have any fear that if you were alone with Danny, that he would hurt you?
You can answer that.
I didn't want to be alone with him. He was angry and very upset. So I had concerns, and friends of mine said I should probably not be alone with him.
But at no time before, and I understand you were being cautious, but at no time before had Danny laid a hand on you before or been violent with you. Is that fair?
You can answer that.
That's fair.
He has never hit you.
You can answer that.
No.
Okay, so then after the meeting in that conversation, did you guys discuss the divorce at all?
I want you to assert.
I assert.
Did he express to you that he did not want to proceed with the divorce?
I want you to assert.
I assert.
Do you remember how were the boys at that meeting with him?
You can answer.
Normal.
Do you think they had any idea anything was going on? I know they must have been really young at the time.
You can answer.
I don't think they had an idea anything was unusual.
Okay, between you and Dan?
Between Danny and me or anything. He took a lot of trips. He came back. We got ice cream.
This wasn't unusual for them.
You can answer that.
No.
Do you think that the boys at the time, did they ask you why we were moving to a different house?
You can answer that.
They didn't ask. At the time, they must have been 2 and 3.
Okay.
I remember telling L too, but he was too young to really listen, that Abba and I were going to live in separate houses and that we were still going to be friends and family. And B wanted to find out if he could have gummy bears. That was his response.
How would you describe Dan as a father to his boys?
You can answer.
He was a good father.
Was he the type of father that looked forward to spending time with the boys?
You can answer.
He was.
Who came first, his boys or his work?
You can answer.
I can't answer that. Danny.
Was his work extremely important to him?
You can answer that.
His work was extremely important to him.
He, apart from teaching at FSU, and correct me if I'm wrong, criminal law was his subject. What other things did he have in the works around the year 2009?
You can answer that if you understand the question.
I understand the question, but I don't remember anything else he was doing. He had a blog that he ran, but that potentially really the two being, there were only 4 law professors, so that related to him being a law professor at FSU.
Did he have any other sources of income apart from his salary as a law professor?
You can answer.
He wrote a book, so there would have been, in theory, proceeds from the book, but I don't know if he wrote the book that year. There were proceeds from the blog in terms of advertising. So there must have been something coming in, but I don't think there were any other sources of income in 2009.
Okay, now, in terms of when, around the time when the divorce paperwork was filed, did you have any discussions with your mother concerning how the divorces was going to proceed?
I want you to assert.
I assert.
Did your mother give you any suggestion on how she thought you should handle the divorce?
I want you to assert.
I assert.
At that time of your divorce, had your parents' feelings towards Dan changed at that point?
I want you to assert.
I assert.
How would you describe your parents' feelings towards Dan at the time that you filed for divorce?
I want you to assert.
I assert.
Did your mother, Donna Adelson, like Dan at that time of your divorce? If you know.
I want you to assert.
I assert.
Did your father, Harvey Adelson, like Dan at the time of your divorce?
Assert.
I assert.
Okay, and Charlie, your brother, what was his opinion of Dan at the time that you filed for divorce?
Assert.
I assert.
Okay, after your divorce, and you said you moved simultaneously to the address, how often would you see Dan with the boys after that?
You can answer.
I need some clarification on the question. So when you say see Dan with the boys, do you mean like I was with the boys and see Danny, or I would see Dan with the boys?
Let me rephrase it. Were there ever a time after that there would be meetings with you and Dan without the boys present?
You can answer.
I worked in the same building as Danny, so I would see him a lot, and we talked a few times that I can remember without the boys.
How was it when you would see him at work? Would you both remain cordial with each other, or was it a situation where you ignored each other?
You can answer that.
We were cordial. There were also work events and things, and it was cordial.
But it wasn't a situation where you were at work and you felt like, oh my God, I need to avoid him because he's going to talk to me about something that's going to make me uncomfortable. Anything like that? Or were you okay with just, your work friendship was fine?
You can answer.
I don't really remember.
Okay.
He definitely would come by to talk to me.
Okay.
So that wasn't always welcome if I didn't know he was coming and was in my office.
Okay.
But I don't remember how many times that happened.
But in those interactions at work, it would never escalate to the point you guys were fighting at work.
You can answer.
No.
How long would you say it took things to settle down between you and Dan after the divorce? And that, I mean, where you could describe your relationship with one another as comfortable in the fact that you were separated.
You can answer that.
It's hard to answer that because I felt comfortable for a long time. I can't speculate as to how he felt, but it was definitely cordial from the beginning.
Is there a time, because I know you said previously, and correct me if I'm wrong, if you didn't, that Dan didn't want the divorce. Is that a fair assessment?
I want you to assert.
I assert.
Did Dan ever say to you, he wanted you, let me work this out, go to counseling, anything like that?
I want you to assert.
I assert.
Okay, there is a point in time after the divorce where, for example, you started dating someone else. Do you remember how long after the divorce that occurred?
You can answer that.
I started dating someone else fairly shortly after the divorce.
Would you say, and I am just trying to get a timeline, a month, 2 weeks, 3 months, a range that you think you felt comfortable?
You can answer.
I think within a month.
Within a month. Okay. Did Dan ever assert to you when you were dating someone else? I mean, did he know? Did you tell him?
You can answer that.
He didn't know.
Okay. Do you think he would have been jealous at the time if you were dating someone else?
You can answer that.
I have no idea.
When to your knowledge, did you know he was dating someone else?
You can answer that.
I don't remember when I found out he was dating someone. I have to think back. Maybe I found out it would have been 2013 or 2014.
I'm trying to get a sense of when. For example, because you are dating other people and he is dating other people. It seems the two of you are kind of on the same page in regards to divorce and separation. I'm trying to figure out.
I don't want you to respond to preparatory comments.
So going back to the divorce, when you filed for the divorce, was the case set for hearing?
Assert.
I assert.
Was there an issue as to custody with the boys?
Assert.
I assert.
By the boys, for the record, I mean her 2 sons. Were there any proceedings had in terms of who was going to have full custody of the boys?
Assert.
I assert.
In you first filing with getting a divorce, did you seek to have full custody or was it shared custody?
Assert.
I assert.
How involved was your mother in terms of the divorce proceedings?
Assert.
I assert.
I'm going to reference certain emails that were referenced in a police report just to put a little context as to where I am going in the next set of questions. And for the record, I'm referring to Detective Craig Isom's supplemental report. One of them is dated September 14th, 2016. And just to put this in some context, on the day that Dan was murdered, you gave your phone to the police?
I want you to assert.
I assert.
You signed a consent for them to search your phone?
I want you to assert.
I assert.
There was a point in time on the video that they had you in custody of your phone and were able to download all of the contents of your phone?
Assert.
I assert.
They were able to come into possession of some of your emails. So I want to bring to your attention an email that is dated May 3rd of 2013. So this is a year before Dan's death. Okay. I'm going to read to you what it says, and I want you to tell me if you remember this conversation that Donna says to you. Donna writes to Wendi, the most important part of your divorce is relocation, and I sincerely hope that your attorney understands that in this is not negotiable. Your attorney needs to understand that your mother worked full-time in the family dental practice until September, when she felt she was needed by you for the well-being of your children to get them through a transitional phase. Do you remember this conversation?
Assert.
I assert.
Do you recall if you had any conversations with your mother in regards to that particular conversation?
Assert.
I assert.
Okay, how important was your moving to South Florida to your mother?
Assert.
I assert.
How important was relocating to South Florida important to you?
Assert.
I assert.
Then it goes on to Wendi is speaking to a counselor. I'm going to read this statement. This is dated May 6th of 2013. You let me know if you remember who this counselor friend is. My mom revealed to me later this evening that she got an anti-anxiety medication for the first time in her life because she found encounters with gibbers to be unsettling and disturbing, that she's spending a large amount of time crying and recovering from these episodes. Do you recall who you were having this conversation with.
Assert.
I assert.
Okay. Do you recall this time when your mother told you that she had been taking anti-anxiety medication?
Assert.
I assert.
Do you know who Gibbers is?
Assert.
I assert.
How much information did you share with your mother in regards to interactions, and how were you feeling about your relationship with Dan?
Assert.
I assert.
Is it fair to say that there are things you would keep from your parents in regards to the details of your divorce?
Assert.
I assert.
Or is it fair to say you were completely upfront with your family about your feelings towards Dan?
Assert.
I assert.
Did you ever express to your parents you were scared for your safety because of Dan?
Assert.
I assert.
Did you ever express to your parents that you were scared for the boy's safety because of your divorce from him?
Assert.
I assert.
Okay, in another email, which this person's counselor responds to and says, your mom's anxiety rises to a level of therapeutic intervention. It's also possible that your mom's state of mind is incessantly to control your life makes it easier for you to make the best choice for yourself going forward. Is that a fair assessment that your friend was making about your mother? And by that, I mean your mother's incessant need to control your life.
Assert.
I assert.
Did you feel that your mother had a substantial control over the decisions that you were making?
Assert.
I assert.
Or would you just take your mother's opinion in stride and do what you wanted?
Assert.
I assert.
All right. In terms of your mom had made some suggestions in an email around June 26th of 2013 of how she felt that you should handle certain things about your divorce. One of them is she says that you should say that you are enrolling your children in a Catholic school. Do you recall your mother making that suggestion?
Please assert.
I assert.
Did you ever take her up on the suggestion?
Assert.
I assert.
Okay, although your mother made certain suggestions on how to handle your divorce, did you follow all of your mother's instructions?
Assert.
I assert.
Do you know why they called him Gibbers?
Assert.
I assert.
Do you know why sorry. There is another email dated June 27th of 2013 from Donna Adelson to Wendi. It says, why not stand up to this, excuse me, fucker, is what it says. Why not fight? We are not talking about a lifetime of this. Did your mother ever have an opinion that you didn't stand up to Dan?
Assert.
I assert.
Did you feel that Dan had a certain level of control over you?
Assert.
I assert.
Would you describe him as emotionally abusive towards you?
What period of time?
Around the time of the divorce, so I would say around 2012, 2013.
Assert.
I assert.
At what time was it when was it that you moved with the boys down to South Florida?
You can answer that.
I left Tallahassee after the memorial, but it wasn't supposed to be a move.
Okay, how would you, at that time, did you believe it was just going to be a temporary visit to South Florida?
You can answer.
I did. I packed pajamas and a weekend suitcase for the three of us and thought I would be back for Bee's birthday, which was July 29th.
That didn't happen?
You can answer.
That didn't happen.
When was the time that the paperwork was filed to have you relocate from South Florida back to Tallahassee? This is before the homicide.
Assert.
I assert.
Okay, when was it that was there ever a time that you took the boys proceeding after the divorce paperwork is filed that you attempted to relocate the boys to South Florida?
Assert.
I assert.
Okay, then was there a court hearing scheduled? Strike that. There was a point in time when the judge ordered you to return to Tallahassee with the boys?
Assert.
I assert.
Was there any court order that had you remain in Tallahassee until the boys turned 18?
Assert.
I assert.
How did you feel about having to stay in Tallahassee?
Assert.
I assert.
How did your parents feel about you having to remain in Tallahassee?
Assert.
I assert.
How did your brother feel? And by brother, I mean Charlie. How did you feel about having to reside in Tallahassee?
Assert.
I assert.
Did you hate living in Tallahassee?
Prior to 2012?
Prior to 2014?
Assert.
I assert.
Prior to 2012, did you like living in Tallahassee?
You can answer that.
I liked living in Tallahassee.
There's an email from you on April 29th of 2014 where you reply to a friend's message that says, my parents and Charlie have been very supportive, but they are so angry at Danny that I don't involve them in most of the details. Do you recall that conversation?
Assert.
I assert.
Okay, if you did, would that have been fair? A fair description that you do not involve your family in most of the details concerning your divorce?
Assert.
I assert.
But it is fair to say that around that time, you keeping steady contact with your mother?
Assert.
I assert.
How often would you be in communication with your brother, Charlie?
Assert.
I assert.
What did Charlie know about the details of your divorce?
Assert.
I assert.
Do you remember who was the first person that you began dating after the divorce?
You can answer.
I do remember.
Okay, who was that?
You can answer.
His name is Miguel.
How long did you date him?
You can answer.
We dated about a year.
Okay, who is the person you dated after that?
You can answer that.
I'm trying to remember the order.
As Mr. DeCoste. If we can stay on Miguel for a second, is that Miguel Edmondson? As Mr. Ferloro. You can answer.
Yes.
It's a cost. Miguel is Miguelle.
Yes.
Edmondson is Edmondson.
Yes.
Did Dan know about your relations with Miguel?
You can answer.
Miguel and I were friends for many years before we started dating. He had come and spent time at our house as a guest.
Okay.
He visited in Tallahassee, so he knew we were friends.
Oh, sorry. Okay, sorry. My page just skipped. What page are we on? Sorry.
Page 60, line 8.
Okay, thank you. Sorry. Take a sip of water.
Okay.
You guys are doing great. 60.
Do you want us to skip ahead?
Oh, no, we're good. Okay. Visited Tallahassee. Okay.
Line 8.
Friend. Oh, line 8. Thank you. Did he ever find out, or did you ever tell him that the relationship had evolved into something more than a friendship?
You can answer.
No.
As far as you know, Dan never knew that you guys were more than friends.
You can answer that.
As far as I know.
Because you know Dan from your marriage. Do you think his personality, that he is the type of person that if he found out, he would have confronted you about it?
At what point?
When you were dating Miguel, if he had found out that your relationship with Miguel was something more than a friendship, would Dan have asked you about it or said something?
You can answer.
Do you mean after we were separated?
After you were separated, yes.
I really don't know.
But he never did?
You can answer that.
He didn't know we were dating, so he didn't confront me because he didn't know.
Who did you date after that?
You can answer that.
I think we are coming now into 2013.
By dating, do you mean relationship of some significance?
Of some significance. I don't mean, going on a date with someone 1 or 2 times, never to speak to them again.
So starting in 2013, I briefly dated Daniel Sack.
How long did you date him?
A couple of months.
Did Dan know about him?
You can answer that.
I don't think so, but I don't know.
At this point, when you were dating Daniel Sack, are you aware that Dan is dating other women, or you don't know?
You can answer that.
I don't think I knew. I didn't ask.
Okay, was the situation at the time, this is around 2013, in terms of custody with the boys, how were you guys handling that?
I want you to assert.
I assert.
Did you guys have a schedule in terms of who would have the boys and for how long?
I want you to assert.
I assert.
After you were dating Daniel Sack, who is the next person you dated?
You can answer.
Jeff Lacoste. DeCoste.
Lacoste.
Lacasse.
Is it fair to say that that relationship began at the end of 2013?
You can answer that.
I'm fuzzy on the details when it started.
Sometime in 2013, would that be a fair answer?
Sometime 2013.
Okay, how long did you date Jeff?
You can answer.
From whenever we started at some point in 2013 until June
Of the following year?
of 2014.
Okay, did Dan ever meet Jeff?
You can answer that.
Yes.
Did they know each other from being professors at FSU?
You can answer that.
I don't think so.
How did you meet Jeff?
You can answer that.
Jeff and I were introduced by a mutual friend,
Who is the mutual friend?
You can answer.
Stephen Tripozzi.
Who else?
As Mr. DeCoste. Jane? As Mr. Lauro. You can answer that.
Yes.
Jane McPherson?
As Mr. DeCoste. McPherson. Is that the correct spelling?
McPherson.
Was that the kind of blind date kind of thing?
You can answer that.
No, I don't think I looked him up ahead of time. I don't think I saw a picture, so I guess, yes, like a blind date.
They said, hey, we have this guy we think you guys would match well together, and guys agreed to go on a date.
You can answer that.
Yes.
When?
You skipped a question.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, did your parents ever meet Jeff?
Oh, did your parents ever meet Jeff? Sorry.
You can answer that.
Yes.
Okay. When?
You can answer that.
My parents met him one time when they came to visit.
When they came to Tallahassee?
Uh-huh.
Did you ever take Jeff down to Miami?
You can answer that.
Jeff came with me when I was leading a spring break program in Imokali, and then I took him to Miami. But I don't remember if I took him up to Coral Springs to see my parents. I'm not sure if I did.
From what you can remember, the interaction of your parents with Jeffrey was more than likely when they came to Tallahassee?
You can answer that.
That's my memory.
Do you recall Charlie and Jeffrey ever being in the same room together?
I want you to assert that.
I assert.
As Mr. DeCoste. What about in a hot tub at his house together? As Mr. DeCoste. I want you to assert.
I assert. That was probably Lauro. Must be a typo.
Yeah, that was
Let's
definitely a typo.
Here, I've noticed.
As Mr. DeCoste, it's my understanding, and this is coming from Jeffrey, that in March of 2014, during that trip down to South Florida, you and Jeffrey stayed at your brother Charlie's house for the night. Is that correct? I want you to assert.
I assert.
Does the time frame of March 2014 seem correct for when you took the trip to South Florida with Jeffrey? I want you to assert.
I assert.
Can we go off for a second? Conversation held off the record.
Yes. Now, we had spoken about you and Jeff had come down, but you mentioned it was around the time of spring break. Would it be fair to say that would be around the time of March of 2014?
You can answer that.
Yes.
And do you remember how long you were in Miami? Was it a couple of days or a couple of weeks?
You can answer that.
It must have been a day or two.
A very short stay. Okay. How many times how did Jeff feel about Dan Markel?
I want you to assert.
I will assert.
Did you discuss with Jeff any details about your divorce?
I want you to assert.
I assert.
Did you express any opinions of how you felt about Dan around the time of 2014 with Jeff?
Please assert.
I assert.
Did you ever say to Jeff that Dan was a bad person, that he was mean, spoke about him in any bad sort of way?
Assert.
I assert.
And how would you describe Jeff as a jealous person?
You can answer that.
I mean, it's hard to say. I think people can feel jealous in certain situations, but to call someone a jealous.
Did he ever get jealous with you in an unwarranted time? Like, did he ever accuse you of anything and it was completely unfounded?
You can answer that.
Yes.
Okay, did your relationship get to the point where Jeff actually ever told you that he loved you?
You can answer that.
I feel like he must have. It's been so long that I don't remember.
All right.
But probably.
Did the boys ever meet Jeff and hang out with Jeff?
You can answer that.
They did.
Was Dan aware of that?
You can answer that.
Danny was with us a couple of times when we were all together.
The interaction that you ever witnessed between Lacoste and Dan Markel, had they ever gotten into an argument in your presence?
You can answer.
I don't remember any argument.
Have you watched Jeffrey Lacoste's several sworn video statements that he has given to the police in this case?
I want you to assert.
I assert.
Okay.
As Mr. DeCoste. For the record, to clear that up, there are 3 statements that were given. One on July 21st, 2014, another on July 23rd, 2014, and the last on March 6th, 2015.
Okay. Have you ever watched any of those recordings?
I want you to assert.
I assert.
Has there ever been a time where have you ever had a conversation with Charlie where Charlie told you that he looked into hiring hitman to kill your husband?
I want you to assert.
I assert.
Did you ever tell Jeffrey Lacoste about a conversation like that you had with your brother?
I want you to assert.
I assert.
If you ever watched his sworn statement to the police, is it your opinion that he was being truthful with the police?
I want you to assert.
I assert.
Okay, when Jeff describes Charlie being a guy that hangs out with people on both sides of the track, do you have any idea what he is talking about?
Assert.
I assert.
Do you know your brother Charlie to hang out with criminals?
Assert.
I assert.
Has Charlie ever introduced you to anybody that you would consider an unsavory individual?
Assert.
I assert.
Now, I am trying to focus to get a time frame leading up to the date Dan was shot. So Dan was shot on July 18th of 2014. Now, prior to July 18th of 2014, when was the last time you remember seeing Dan?
You can answer.
My best memory of the last time I saw Danny was probably a few days before that, when I took the kids for dinner and I saw him. I don't remember now. It was in the complex where they moved the Whole Foods to, and there was a burger fight there at the time. Now I don't remember which one we were entering, but I saw him in the window working at one of them. Maybe I saw him at the Whole Foods when we were going into the burger fight. That was the last time I saw him.
Would it be fair to say that you had given a sworn statement to the police on the day he was murdered? Is that correct?
Laura?
I'm sorry. I just.
It's okay.
I want you to assert. I assert.
We're on
I
page
want you to assert.
or
I
something.
assert.
Okay.
Keep going.
Okay. Would it be fair to say a recollection of the time when you gave that statement would be better than it is today?
I want you to assert.
I assert.
So I can rely on your your statement that you gave to the police where you said you had seen him at the Whole Foods.
I want you to assert.
I assert.
Is there any doubt in your mind that you were at Trescott Drive the day before your husband was killed?
I want you to assert.
I assert.
Would there be any reason why you would be walking down the street with the boys the day before, which was July 17th of 2014?
I want you to assert.
I assert.
At that time, around July of 2014, what school were the boys attending?
You can answer that.
They were attending creative preschool.
What time would normally school start for them?
You can answer that.
I honestly don't remember. So sometime in the morning,
Early morning?
8 or 9.
How many days a week did they go in July of 2014?
You can answer that.
I also don't remember because it was summertime, and it would depend if I was done teaching for the summer, if they would go less. I don't remember if they were there 5 days a week or less.
Do you remember July 18th of 2014 was a Friday. On that day, when this occurred, do you remember if the boys were at creative daycare that day?
I want you to assert.
I assert.
The day before would have been a Thursday. Do you remember if the boys were at creative daycare the day before?
I want you to assert.
I assert.
Do you know whose week it was that week, which is the week of July 18th? So the Monday would have been July 14th. Were the boys with you, or did Dan have the boys that week?
I want you to assert.
I assert.
Okay. Is it fair to say that your custody arrangement at the time would have been 1 week with you and 1 week with him?
I want you to assert.
I assert.
Okay, then in the weeks that Dan would have the boys, you would see them on a Wednesday and vice versa.
I want you to assert.
I assert.
Had you just been in Miami 2 weeks? Before 2 weeks, right? Before the homicide.
I want you to assert.
I assert.
Did you make that trip with your boys down to Miami to see your family? Was it for your father's 70th birthday party?
I want you to assert.
I assert.
Did you travel down to Miami for your father's 70th birthday party?
I want you to assert.
I assert.
Did your father have a party for his 70th birthday party?
I want you to assert.
I assert.
If there was a party, Was Charlie Adelson at that party?
I want you to assert.
I assert.
Was Robert Adelson at that party?
I want you to assert.
I assert.
Was Donna Adelson at that party?
I want you to assert.
I assert.
Did you bring anybody to that party?
Assert.
I assert.
Were the boys at that party?
Assert.
I assert.
Did you bring Jeff to the party?
Assert.
I assert.
Do you recall if during that trip, were you having any conversations with your family, your mother in particular, about any issues that you were having with Dan at that time?
I want you to assert.
I assert.
Did you have any specific issues with Dan at that time?
Assert.
I assert.
Is it fair to say that at that point, you pretty much moved on from your divorce with Dan?
Assert.
I assert.
Starting with your mother, did Donna Adelson seem strange to you in those 2 weeks that you were in Miami?
Assert.
I assert.
Did your brother Charlie say anything to you that caused any concern?
Assert.
I assert.
At that time, did your brother Charlie speak ill or say anything bad about Dan at that time?
Assert.
I assert.
Your father Harvey, did he at that time express any issues with Dan?
Assert.
I assert.
Did you have any knowledge of any plans to have your husband killed when you were down in Miami at that point?
Assert.
I assert.
Do you think that your mother is capable of the theory of hiring a hitman to kill your ex-husband?
Assert.
I assert.
Your brother Charlie, the same question.
Assert.
I assert.
How were the boys those 2 weeks when they were in Miami? Did they enjoy being there?
Assert.
I assert.
How much time did your mom spend with the boys leading up to July 18th of 2018?
Assert.
I assert. I need to ask my lawyer a question.
Sure, no problem.
Recess
was
taken.
Yes. Okay. Now, so Mrs. Adelson, have you ever met someone with the name of Catherine McBanua?
Assert.
I assert.
How did you meet her?
Assert.
I assert.
Do you remember when you met her?
Assert.
I assert.
Do you remember if this was, were you introduced to her as a girlfriend of your brother?
Assert.
I assert.
Or did he just introduce her as a friend he was dating?
Assert.
I assert.
Do you know how many times you've ever come into interactions with Catherine McBanua?
Assert.
I assert.
And in any, if you did have any interactions with her or hung out with her at any time, did you ever open up to her about your divorce?
Assert.
I assert.
Did you guys have that type of relationship that you would go into details about the divorce, which you had had a year before?
Assert.
I assert.
Did you ever talk to Catherine McBanua after July of 2018?
Assert, as Mr. DeCoste. July 18th, 2018, to be specific.
I'm sorry, July 18th of 2018.
As Mr. DeCoste. No, July 18th, 2004.
I'm going to re-ask the question. Have you ever had any conversation with Catherine McBanua after the date your husband was killed?
Assert.
Assert.
Have you ever hung out with Catherine at your parents' apartment in South Beach?
Assert.
I assert.
Were your parents living at the time? Where were your parents living at the time after Dan was shot?
Assert.
I assert.
Have you ever met anybody by the name of Sigfredo Garcia?
Assert.
I assert.
Do you even know who he is?
Assert.
I assert.
All right. Have you ever heard of Charlie talking about someone with a name by the name of Sigfredo Garcia?
Assert.
I assert.
Have you ever heard of Charlie talking about the Latin kings?
Assert.
I assert.
Have you ever heard of Charlie mentioned that he knows of any members of the Latin kings?
Assert.
I assert.
Do you know of someone by the name of June Umchenda?
As Mr. DeCoste. UMCHINDA. As Mr. Laurel. You can answer that.
I do know June.
Is that someone your brother started dating after the homicide?
You can answer that.
I don't know when he and June started dating.
Are June and him still dating?
You can answer that.
I have no idea.
When was the last time you spoke to your brother?
Assert.
I assert.
By brother, I mean Charlie Adelson.
Assert.
I assert.
When was the last time you spoke to Robert, your brother?
You can answer that.
Probably in 4 years.
Since you had any communication with him?
Yes.
Now, would you be able to tell me where you were the day before Dan was shot? That would be Thursday, July 17th of 2014.
I want you to assert.
I assert.
Would you have any independent recollection of your day-to-day schedule the week of June 17th through June 14th of 2014?
Assert.
I assert.
Okay.
You asked about June 14th.
The week of June 14th, by that question, I mean, would you be able to...
As Mr. DeCoste. July.
July, thank you. Would you be able to tell me your whereabouts each one of those days, July 14th? And thank you for the correction.
Assert.
I assert.
All right. The day of the homicide. Did you have a conversation with Dan that morning?
Assert.
I assert.
Did Dan reach out to you in an attempt to have the boys? He said that he offered that he would take the boys for the afternoon and possibly take them to the pool. Do you remember him leaving you that voicemail?
Assert.
I assert.
Do you remember trying to get back in touch with him?
Assert.
I assert.
Do you remember explaining all of your whereabouts to Detective Isom on the day of the homicide took place?
Assert.
I assert.
When you were giving that statement to Detective Isom, did Detective Isom tell you that you were being recorded?
Assert.
I assert.
Did you know you were being recorded?
Assert.
I assert.
All right. Now, that morning, you were at home having your TV repaired. Is that true?
Assert.
I assert.
Did you have an 18-minute conversation with your brother that morning?
Assert.
I assert.
Do you have an independent recollection of the conversation you had with your brother that morning?
Assert.
I assert.
Do you recall if your brother was asking you any questions about Dan's whereabouts that day?
Assert.
I assert.
Would you have known what Dan's whereabouts would have been at that time of July of 2014?
Assert.
I assert.
Okay. Do you recall if you had any conversation with your mother around the time of the murder that week, of them trying to ask you where you would be at a particular time?
Assert.
I assert.
Do you recall any of your family members speaking ill of Danny or saying anything in terms that would lead you to believe that something would happen to him that week of July of 2014?
Assert.
I assert.
At that time, did you have any suspicion that anyone would try to hurt Dan?
Assert.
I assert.
When you found out that Dan had been shot, were you completely shocked?
Assert.
I assert.
Where were you when you found out that Dan had been shot?
Assert.
I assert.
Who were you with when you found out that Dan was shot?
Assert.
I assert.
Did you learn that Dan
As Mr. DeCoste.
Markel?
Did you
Go.
learn that Dan Markel was shot when you were in the interview room with Tallahassee Police Department investigators? As Mr. Lauro. Assert.
I assert.
What information did Detective Isom give you when you were leaving the restaurant to go to the police station?
I assert.
I assert.
Do you remember if Detective Isom was with anybody else when he transported you from the restaurant to the police station?
Assert.
I assert.
There was a point on the video when you leave the room to go use the bathroom. Do you remember coming into contact with anybody at that time, having any conversation with them at that time?
Assert.
I assert.
It was very important during that recording. You and Mrs. Fearson basically reiterated important it was to have a rabbi go to the hospital. Do you remember that?
Assert.
I assert.
Okay. Do you know if, or did you go to the hospital after you left the police station?
Assert.
I assert.
Did you go straight to your boys?
Assert.
I assert.
All right. What information was given to you by Detective Isom that is not on the recording?
I assert.
I assert.
How soon after the homicide was the memorial service?
You can answer that if you recall.
I'm trying to remember. To my best recollection, it was like Sunday.
The Sunday following the incident?
That is what I remember, but maybe it was Monday. There was a wake for several days, so I don't remember.
Days started probably flowing into each other. Was it a few days after the shooting?
2 or 3 days after.
Okay. Did your parents immediately come up when you let them know what had happened?
Assert.
I assert.
On the recording, you contact your mother and inform her that Danny had been shot. On the morning, you can hear the reaction from your mother. Do you recall what your mother said to you?
Assert.
I assert.
Would you be able to tell me more specifically what your mother said to you on the phone at that time?
Assert.
I assert.
Do you know if she indicated in any way, shape, or form that she knew before you told her that he had been shot?
Assert.
I assert.
Who picks you up from the police station?
You can answer that if you know.
Who?
Or did they release you to your car to you?
No, I think the detective drove me to my friend's house who had the boys.
Okay, would that be Lynn?
You can answer.
Lynn.
Do you remember any conversations that you had with the detective? Would that be Detective Isom you drove with?
Assert.
I assert.
Do you remember what conversation you had with Detective Isom when he was taking you to Lynn's house?
Assert.
I assert.
When she says sorry, go.
As Mr. DeCoste. When she says Detective Isom, do you know who we are referring to? As Mr. Lauro. You can answer that.
Yes.
As Mr. DeCoste. You know him as investigator, not detective. Investigator Craig Isom, ISOM, as Mr. Lauro. You can answer that.
In my head, I kept thinking of him as General Isom. I don't know what his actual title is. Investigator now.
Do you recall how soon your parents made it to Tallahassee?
Assert.
I assert.
Did your brother Charlie come to Tallahassee when he found out about the shooting?
Assert.
I assert.
Do you remember what conversation you had with your parents? Can you describe to me the conversations with your parents when you first saw them after the shooting?
I assert.
I assert.
Did you speak with your parents if they drove up? I don't know if they drove up or they flew, but if they drove up, did you talk to them on the phone on the way up?
Assert.
I assert.
If you did, do you remember the details of that conversation?
Assert.
I assert.
In your opinion, was your brother surprised? Was your mother surprised when you told her Danny was shot?
Assert.
I assert.
Or did her reaction to the information cause you any pause?
Assert.
I assert.
Is it your opinion that your mother behaved oddly, not how someone would normally react when finding out their ex-son-in-law has passed away? Was her behavior, in your opinion, strange?
Assert.
I assert.
Same for your father. Do you think your father was acting strange?
Assert.
I assert.
Did Charlie come to Tallahassee, I think, for the memorial?
Assert.
I assert.
At that time, now you've been up for a few days, were you prescribed any medication to deal with the anxiety after Dan was shot?
Assert.
I assert.
All right. Who was it that handled the arrangements for the memorial service?
If you know, you can answer.
So I have a friend named Elizabeth Chambers, now Elizabeth Emanuel, but she and Chris weren't married then. I saw her at the memorial and I asked her, "Are you here for me or are you here in an official capacity?" She said both. So I don't know if she was in charge of the memorial or something to do with the funeral. I don't know if they were separate, but that's as much as I know.
As Mr. DeCoste. Okay, do you know how she spelled the last name, both her maiden name and her married name? As Mr. Laurel. You can answer.
Yes. Chambers was Chambers, and Emmanuel should be Emmanuel.
Do you know when Dan's parents were able to come to Tallahassee?
You can answer that.
I'm not positive, but my best guess is they would have flown in on Saturday.
The day after?
Saturday. I mean, they were there at the memorial. So the question is, was the memorial on Sunday or Monday? So Saturday or Sunday?
Did they come and see you and the boys?
You can answer that.
I don't remember when I saw them first. I don't remember if I saw them before the memorial. I definitely spent time with them after the memorial.
Okay.
But I don't remember when I first saw them.
Did you spend time with them at the memorial in South Florida or in Tallahassee?
You can answer that.
Well, it depends on approximates if we're talking about times. They came to my home in Tallahassee. We spent time there, and then I spent time with them over the years since in South Florida.
You left. How soon after the memorial service?
You can answer that.
So the police had my computer. I remember I wanted to have my computer. It's my work computer before I left, but I had been calling and it seemed like I wasn't going to get my computer back. I feel like, I don't know if it was another day or day and a half or 2 days.
After the memorial?
Yes.
Do you remember who it was that you were trying to contact about the computer?
You can answer.
No. Maybe I contacted Isom because he would have been my contact, or I met the victim advocate. Maybe it was her, but I have no memory of that.
As Mr. DeCoste. Would that be Sarah Latour? As Mr. Laurel. You can answer that.
That's the name of the victim advocate, but I don't know if I was contacting her or I was contacting someone else.
Okay. Have you gotten your computer back?
Assert.
I assert.
Was Detective Isom at the memorial service?
You can answer that.
I think so.
Did he make an attempt to come and to speak to you at the memorial service?
Assert.
I assert.
Did Detective Isom try to speak to your parents at the memorial service?
Please assert.
I assert.
And I apologize if I'm repeating myself. Did Charlie come to the memorial service?
Assert.
I assert.
Did Robert come to the memorial service?
Assert.
I assert. Do you guys want to stop now?
Yeah, I think we're on page
I don't
100.
know. Yeah, that's on. We finished 100 pages, and I think we have about 58 pages to go of text. So,
You guys want to
Thank
pick it up
you.
another time, or what do you want to do?
sure, yeah, maybe once we go off the air, we can see if there's any other future date that's good with all three of us. Otherwise,
Yeah,
just even having one other person helping out really makes it go better.
totally.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, well, it looks like
That
a
was
lot
an
of the
awesome
regulars.
job.
Good
Yeah,
job. You
thank you.
You remind
was
me
fun.
of
hair out of this bun. It's-
Tara Kawasa. Remind me of Anna Delvey from the
I was
Netflix
gonna
show.
say it. I told my mother, I said, I literally sound like Anna inventing Anna.
Anna Delvey.
Anna Delvey with the German and British
Yeah.
worldly accent. And I tried, you guys. The Jamaican accent is so hard.
Yeah, it's hard, but I mean, you
And
did
it's
a good job because you had to do about 95% of the talking while you and I just kind of sat there saying assert.
Thank you
Yeah.
guys. It was fun. I took acting 101 and every penny paid off.
You can tell.
Yeah.
You can tell, Anna Delvey. All right. Well, I'll be in touch. Thank
Okay.
you.
Good
Sounds
job.
good. Thank you guys out there. Sorry we can't hang on and address all the comments, but I do have a meeting to go to. So
yeah.
we'll be in touch soon.
I'm-
Thank you.
Okay.
Comment, you guys.
Take care. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.